Hi there. To help you prepare for your chairman of the board meeting, I'm going to walk through several past presentations by students and tell you what I did like about the presentations and what I didn't like about the presentations. And hopefully this will give you a great idea of how to put together your presentation. Just to recap, your job during this presentation is to explain the whys of your performance during the simulation. And if we're going to put it into a real context, it's if your team did well, to justify the fact that you were good and not just lucky, and that you deserve an executive raise. And if you didn't do so well, that you shouldn't be fired. And how do you do that? You do that by fessing up to your performance shortfalls, showing that you understand why the bad things happened, and then doing better. So during this video, I'm going to be a very small picture in the bottom right-hand corner because the focus is going to be on the slides of the presentations. Like I've mentioned to you before, each of your companies has a different story to tell, and you should be focused on telling your company's story, not trying to tell somebody else's story. So as I go through the various presentations, I'll comment on what they did well and what they didn't do well. Again, this is just to give you an idea of things that you might want to consider doing. By all means, I'm available during the first part of the week as you are putting your presentations together to come by and discuss with me what your plans are or whatever. This is a big deal. This is your capstone excuse me, exercise for your MBA program. So we're really looking excuse me, looking for you to deliver a great presentation. Hang on a second. As you can see, I'm going to be a little less polished than I try to be in some of the other videos, just for the sake of time. So look at the slides, and I'm going to walk you through the first sample presentation. This was the presentation of the team that probably dominated the simulation as much as I've ever seen any team dominate. You'll see that in some of their performance characteristics, such that frankly by the end of the game they had everybody pretty much under control. These were also the folks that spent like 20 hours a week on the computer, which is why I put in some of the limits that I've tried to do. Obviously, this probably would not show up during the when we click on the PowerPoint viewer, but don't discuss the simulation as though it is a game. It is your company, and try to treat it as real life as you can. This was their how did they do slide. A couple of things they did very well with this slide. You'll notice they didn't have everybody on here. What they had on here were their two top rivals and the industry average, even though they misspelled industry. So if you did well, this is probably the right kind of slide. If you did poorly, you're going to probably want the industry average, and unfortunately you're going to be down in this area. So you see that they decluttered the slide, and already you get part of what they're going to say, which is we really only had two teams that competed against us, and we established dominance over them and crushed them. I said two teams, three teams that competed with them, and by the end they had throttled pretty much all of them. A couple of the things I like about this slide. Notice that the lines are fairly thick. I don't think it's a good idea to have these little data point corners on here because that just clutters it up. One of the things you're also going to notice is throughout the slides, all of this team's color, their lines are all the same color. So they worked hard to keep the colors the same throughout. That was good. What isn't so good is this silly green color. Obviously, this doesn't stand out very well. I would never have selected that color to be my firm's color. And I don't know what it is about the newer versions of PowerPoint. It picks the awfulest colors. So don't hesitate to go in and change it. That's on the slidesmanship. If you just look at this slide and know that this is this team presenting, think about it for a second. If you're shown this slide and told basically we won, looking at this slide, you have a few key questions that you're interested in, and they're very obvious. And I've mentioned this to you before. They're the inflection points in the graph. So you want to know, wow, what did you do from year 13 to year 14? What happened in year 16? And how did you turn around in year 17? That's pretty much what you're interested in for this team or from this company. And if the presentation doesn't touch on that, then you're going to walk away disappointed. Their next slide, which I thought was very well done, is a quick orientation of their strategy. So it sets the tone or the context for the rest of their presentation. So you can see what their setup slides were. So they told you that their objective was to gain the greatest market share and be the low-cost leader. And the next several slides proceed to do that. This slide shows them as clearly the market share leader in Europe, Africa. Let's say that that was true also of another region or two. You don't need to show every region. You just need to show, say, you could say, for example, this is what the market share was in Europe, Africa, and it was largely the same in North America and Latin America as well. Not a whole lot of interest here because they had dominance throughout. So part of your question would be, how did you jump out to such a strong market share in the first year, and what did you do here to take it so high? You can see they show one other slide. I'm sorry, they show two other slides. One is Asia Pacific, where they did not have the top market share. They started out in this area, and incidentally, the market share numbers are greater than many of the simulations you'll see because there weren't as many teams participating, so there's fewer competitors to divvy up. But obviously, downward trend here, and then they did something here that really spiked it. Then you're wondering what happened here and what happened here. And that probably relates to their traces, their performance traces as well. And then lastly, they have Latin America, which again, you can see kind of all over the map. And then here, big up, and then consistently strong performance. So in one sense, these charts show that they met their objectives. They, in fact, were the largest market share, I believe, in all four of the regions. They talk about how they achieved their cost leadership position. They talked about their distribution. They talked about their plant upgrades. This is where you could get into fit in your value chain. Some of you did a great job of this. Some of you didn't do a good job of this at all, and this is where you're going to need to identify this. What they could have done here, in addition to just showing these words, is they could have shown, for example, did they in fact have a cost leadership position? Because you know from your products what the industry average is and what the industry low is. So they could have put a chart up saying, hey, out of our North American plant, we were always the cheapest shoe. Out of our Asia Pacific plant, we were always the cheapest shoe, or we were always one of the cheapest shoes. They don't have a slide like that, but you can see that that would have helped. And then they talked about how they use celebrity appeal to save on marketing expense. But again, they don't have any sort of slide that backs that up. So you don't know, well, how much did it save them? How do they know this? So they throw it out as a statement, but there's no verification of that fact. They talked through this. Not a bad slide, but not any backup on it as well. And first mover number of models, again, they could have captured that, showing how they raised their models first and to the extent to which people followed. Bids for celebrity appeal, did they do a particularly good job of buying celebrities cheaper than everyone else? And then he put down here, build more capacity. Again, they don't show you any sort of backup information on any of that. So they're doing a nice job of walking through the presentation, and they really did a great job of teasing out the keys to their stellar performance. There were times, however, where they could have presented more information to back up what the words that they're saying on the slides. This is where they did a nice job of talking about this slide to show how much standard materials had risen in year 16 and how much superior materials had fallen. And they talked their way through how they shifted to more superior materials to get their star rating, and it saved them a lot of money. And then they talked about the fact that they focused on competitors a lot. This is where they spent all their time. They really tracked competitors, and this is one of those teams that almost knew better what a lot of the other firms did in the industry than the firms themselves had done. They could almost better predict what the firm was going to do than the firm realized it was going to do, because they were just doing things they were doing them in a pattern without thinking about whether that was the right pattern. So they didn't have a good clue as to whether they were doing the right thing, but these other folks knew what they were going to do. And then lastly, they closed with the private label market. This particular team took a huge risk and built a tremendous amount of capacity to the point that they literally, even though they had a dominant market share position, they couldn't sell all their shoes in the branded market. So they went in the last year, and you can see they captured 80% of the private label market, which was where some of the teams had been making money. And they went in and just took it all away. A couple of things about this slide. Mainly, it doesn't make any sense. Okay, it's talking about private label segment. That is not their net profit from the private label segment. That is their total net profit. So is that a good thing to have on the slide? Notice that these percentages don't add to 100%. You would think they would. So lots of small problems with this slide, but strategically a great slide, because what they established was, hey, we were killing them in the branded sales, so then we went into private label and we own it. And now we have all this capacity. We're never going to let it back because no one can underbid us because we have the lowest costs. And they did. And then very nice wrap-up slide where they talk about what they're going to do in the future. In this case, they didn't have to be real specific, frankly, because they had already squeezed out everybody and were such a dominant position. But they made it clear what their plans were. They were going to add more capacity by building in Latin America, and they were going to continue to stay in the private label market and basically make sure that nobody else could compete by bidding it with a profit price of like $1 a shoe. And because their costs were so much lower than everyone else, which is a point that they do not well establish in the presentation, no one else could sell the shoes at the same price and have any hope of making a profit. So this is what a winning team's presentation and what was a very solid presentation. They did a great job of at least in their words, teasing out the reality of their competitive advantage. They had some great slides that backed up their words, but they also could have had some more analytical approaches, some more charts or whatever that would have established that. So I'm going to switch to another presentation that again was from the top finishing team. This was in the older Globus simulation, which is the cameras as opposed to shoes, but there's still some good principles there. So if you'll pardon me for just a minute while I change the slide slow presentation. Whoops, that didn't work like I wanted it to. My screen isn't doing a good job of centering on it, but since I'm recording, I can't resize it, so we'll just have to take it like it is. You can see that what this team doesn't have is it doesn't have a this is how we did kind of slide. In fact, they were the winners. They put on there what their strategy was, which is good, and they're going to talk about some of these key points. Notice that they put in there the industry average price and their price, and that fits well with how they ran their company. They talked about how they ran. EL stands for entry level and MF stands for multi-featured, and not what some people mean when they use the abbreviation MF. So they established here that we were in fact typically the low-cost manufacturer, even though incidentally they weren't running the lowest star rating camera. They just had a very efficient value chain. And then they talk about the multi-featured, how they dropped their price down, and you can see they were actually below the industry average, even though, again, they were running an above-average camera in terms of quality. These were two good slides because in this particular simulation, the labor costs play a big role, and they go on to show you that they had just a tremendous advantage over everyone else in this. The slides aren't that, the charts themselves aren't that great because again, you got those ugly boxes, and they show you that they were below the average. They don't always show you how they were on the lowest. Here in the words, they do a nice job of telling you how they were able to achieve that. This is a totally worthless slide. First of all, it's confusing. It's kind of meaningless. And second, it didn't really talk about a critical point. In all cases, when you're showing me a slide, it ought to be a critical point. For some of you, you're going to need to talk about the fact that you bought your stock back at its highest point, which is not exactly a great corporate strategy. But only show me a slide if it's a part of the story that you need to tell about your company. This is where the first time where they talk about how they performed, and notice that they are showing their stock performance against their market share. They did a nice job of painting that is their stock price went up in part because their multi-featured stock price went up. I'm sorry, their multi-featured camera market share went up. But you can see how they cleverly combined the two topics to tell the story. This is a story that should have been told much earlier, however. This is a good use of a chart and this little circle here because they say this is where we want you to look on this chart. Because what happened this year, one of their major competitors slashed their price. So the next year, they cut their price dramatically. And that's what they were trying to show. And again, the slide worked very well with the word descriptions. This was a little bit of a rah-rah, we won everybody else, or we beat everybody else kind of slide, but not a bad concluding slide. Okay, I'm going to stop the video here and call up 2 other presentations and walk you through them, telling you again what I liked and didn't like about the presentation.